focus on the things we do, that's fundamentally personal and individual. Some students care about pre-med. Other students cared about, I had a student who was a twin and was trying to think about identity based on if you have a twin. The questions varied. I had a student who he wanted to think about what happens to your mind when you're commuting, because the central experience at Rutgers that all students share in common is that they're always stuck on the bus. We have a giant bus system that hauls students between our 5 different campuses. So there's this shared experience where students spend a lot of time waiting for the bus and then a lot of time on the bus. And this guy wrote a very philosophical exploration of consciousness. I could never have assigned such a thing, but that's what he really wanted to figure out. Where did his brain go when you're in between your 2 destinations? And if you don't turn your technology on to take you out of that space, where are you?
Right. Well, that's really interesting because I have an hour commute to and from work every day. So I'm like, I know my mind goes all over the place while I'm commuting. So that's a really interesting topic.
Well, and to address how much technology's changed, I'm sure you do this, having read your work, that some of the stuff you do in that time wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. The podcasts that are available now, the way in which you can be constantly educating yourself while you're on the move, if you have your earbuds in, or the main activity for the students, of course, is listening to music.
Absolutely. I often wonder, I'm like, what did people do 10 years ago when they had an hour commute? I was like, I'd be so bored right now.
Indeed. Yeah.
And it's, you said, like, as a writer, you can't tell someone what they care about. And, as a fellow writer, it's my writing isn't as good unless I'm passionate about what I'm writing about. I love what I write about, and I find myself when I have to write about something, that passion goes away and my writing's not as good.
Absolutely. And that's when you are teaching a course that's required, students come through the door feeling like, well, this is just some stupid thing I have to check off. I'm going to be an engineer. Why do I need to do this? And then it's like, well, let's latch into what you're passionate about. And for some engineers, that is actually thinking about stuff like risk, so write about risk. But, and I don't mean the board game, of course. I mean the collapsing of buildings and bridges and when do things reach their stress point.
Yeah.
But everybody, they don't automatically have it. It takes time to figure out what you're passionate about. And you actually have to slow down and let things get quiet.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's done. I was really frustrated after teaching writing for 20 years and feeling like the curriculum at the university didn't really have anything to do with this profound change that's altered everything about the world we live in, the politics, the economy, relationships, personal relationships, family correspondence. There's nothing that's been left untransformed by this technology. And yet I would go into class and talk to students, and the kind of work we were all doing is work that could have been taking place in 1950. And yeah. I just felt it was really my responsibility to learn how to use this amazing technology for composing.
No, that's so true. Curriculum really needs to, step up to the technology because it's everywhere now and it's a part of everything we do. I actually wrote my thesis in grad school on how technology affects personal relationships. So I can completely understand about it. Just touches everything. I did. Yeah. Uh-huh. And so it's a topic that, it wasn't really covered. And I was like, but now relationships are even so different. Everything we do is so different. Relationships, even with just family and not just like, boyfriend, girlfriend, or getting engaged. Like there's every relationship you have, work, you never leave work. So the relationships you have with coworkers, you're constantly in touch, it touches everything.
Well, and then, as we're finding, one of the Democratic candidates is already being criticized for posts he made in high school. So
isn't that crazy? Everything's going to come back.
Yeah. So that repository, right? So you do all that social media work when you're a teen and your relationships and Facebook and all those pictures. And it turns out you're never going to escape that. And it's a funny thing. I think the technology is going to require that we fundamentally rethink human development. In the past, sometimes it's a real relief to be able to forget something. And,
absolutely.
And to live in a world where, your worst moment might be caught on film or might have been recorded and be released at a time that's really unfortunate. We all live with that. And I think that that's why Tyler's, the incorrect, but the most current version for Clementi's suicide struck such a chord with people. It was this sense of, wait a minute, I'm in my room with my door closed. Why is what I'm doing in here anybody else's business? Let alone, how is it possible that people could be watching me? And I think that the story took off because of that prevalent fear, which is now much realer than it was in 2010, that anything you say or do could be recorded and shared without your permission.
Absolutely. And when it comes to privacy, do you think the chance of that is obsolete now?
Well, it's funny. There was an argument that you could make like 2 or 3 months ago that would say, well, privacy remains, but only if you're wealthy. Trump can pay off the magazine from Florida, the National Enquirer, and get stories buried. Rich people have always had privileges that the rest of us don't have. And then all of a sudden, Jeff Bezos, his account is hacked and his most private information is released. And in that moment, I really had to step back and say, like, wow, it just takes, a sibling of someone you're involved with getting access to a phone. And suddenly, even though you're the richest man in the world and at the very top of this technological pyramid, you're as vulnerable as anybody else. The key difference there, though, so privacy, I think every single person is vulnerable to being exposed, the history of how they've used this technology, being exposed, everybody, even if you're wealthy. The difference is wealthy people won't be destroyed by those revelations. And as I've thought about this particular revelation, you can't escape the fact that it's very different for this being the revelation about a white man's genitalia, as opposed to, all you have to do is flip the script and say, what if we had Oprah Winfrey's private pictures? I do think the gender bias, which is in the DNA of the internet, which creates such an incredibly hostile environment for women, the story would have been very, very different.
Guaranteed.
So, Bezos gets to be somewhat embarrassed that people are aware of what he looks like naked, but he also seems rather proud of them.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And so I think the question is complicated in that right now where we are, I don't think even wealth can protect you, your privacy. So is it antiquated? Well, Europe's ahead of us in terms of, I love this idea that they put forward the right to be forgotten, and that the legislation in Europe is about trying to regulate the internet so that it doesn't serve as this eternal repository of everything that's ever been posted there. I end the book talking about Ravi, the roommates, he his conviction gets overturned on appeal, and he pleads to a misdemeanor count of attempted invasion of privacy. And the last we hear of him in official news is the quote of his lawyer that says he just wants to disappear. But of course, that isn't possible on the internet, right? I mean, anytime you search his name for the rest of his life, all of this will be there. And we have to figure out the virtues of being able to forget without at the same time celebrating the ability to bury and cover things that people who are wealthy enough can afford to do, and the rest of us are permanently exposed.
Yeah. You talked about Monica Lewinsky in the book, and I read her, or I saw her TED Talk here a little while ago about how she was the first ever internet bullied, cyber bully person. And it was so interesting because I was like, wow, I never thought about that, but she really was. She was the joke of all these emails, and that was before social media. It's so interesting. Nothing she could never escape that. That was the beginning of it.
Yeah. And she's is such a courageous person, I think.
I agree.
Her willingness to stand up in such a hostile environment, because the trolling, this it's adolescent male energy that drives so much of the dark and unkind behavior online is all enabled by anonymity. And her willingness to not disappear to do the opposite, to say, not I want to disappear, but actually I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about the consequences of living in a world where people are subjected to this kind of shaming. But what I argue in the book that is actually that she identified with Tyler, but they actually were shamed in different worlds. She was never afraid that there was a video of her interactions with the president. And initially, at least, there was fear that there was a video of Tyler having sex with another man. And the power of that sharing of visual information is just, I would say, of a different order than the tape recordings that Linda Tripp did of Monica Lewinsky. Shaming, horrible, ghastly, absolutely. But what Tyler touched on was not simply that you would be betrayed by a friend about the most intimate details of your life, but this idea that somebody might actually have filmed you.
Scary.
It is. I think I don't think Monica Lewinsky would have survived it had she been filmed. And I'm absolutely certain Bill Clinton's presidency would have ended immediately.
Definitely.
Immediately.
It'd be a whole different story if it was on film.
Yeah.
So what is your advice when dealing with online presence and privacy for our average listeners out there? Especially the younger ones who are in college like Tyler was, still trying to figure out who they are. What's your biggest advice for dealing with the fact that everything can be online now?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's always contextual, the answer to it. So one thing for parents who are listening and thinking about their kids, or kids who are just entering college, the most vulnerable time is that first year. You're in a new environment, you are trying to fit in, but you've lost your moorings. And that's actually when kids are most at risk of doing something involving self-harm. And it's really exacerbated by the social media, because you can go away to college but spend all of your time online talking, communicating with your friends from high school. So you're not where you are, and I think that actually makes people very vulnerable. How do you manage these things? I never suggest to my students that the option of opting out is actually viable. You can opt out of Facebook, you can opt out of social media, but if you're a teacher, you're a student, you can't opt out of email. You're probably texting your parents, you're texting friends.